When your hair changes, it doesn't feel like just hair, it feels personal. And something I want you to understand right away, the emotional response you're having to hair loss is valid, but also there are more solutions today than ever before. Hi everyone, I'm a trichology specialist with a master in public health and a background in integrative nutrition. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through hormonal hair thinning in women, what it is, how to recognize it, and what's actually happening biologically, and what you can realistically do about it. Because one of the biggest issues I see is this. Women and men are told it's just stress, your labs are normal, this is just aging, and they are left without real answers. But here's the truth, hair loss is not random and it's not just cosmetic. It affects identity, confidence, and how you show up in your life. So today we're going to break this down properly so you actually understand what's happening and what to do next. Hair is deeply tied to how we perceive health, youth, and vitality. Biologically, thick hair is associated with fertility and wellness, so we are wired to care about it. That's why when your hair changes, it doesn't feel like just hair, it feels personal. And something I want you to understand right away, the emotional response you're having to hair loss is valid, but also there are more solutions today than ever before. Hormonal hair thinning, also known as androgenic alopecia, is one of the most common types of hair loss I see in women. But it doesn't usually happen all at once. It is gradual. It develops slowly over time, which is exactly why it's so easy to miss in the beginning. Most women don't notice it early. They notice it later when something already feels different. Maybe your hair doesn't feel as full, your ponytail feels thinner, or your part looks a little wider than it used to. And that's the key difference with this type of hair loss. You're not seeing sudden bald spots, you're seeing subtle changes that build over time. Whitening part, less overall volume, and strands that are becoming finer with each cycle. So it is not always dramatic, it is progressive, and that's why understanding it early makes such a big difference. There are a few patterns I look for right away. You might be dealing with this if you notice things like I mentioned before, your ponytail feeling thinner than it used to, your part gradually getting wider, seeing a little more scalp, especially at the crown, your hair texture changing, maybe it feels finer, drier, or harder to manage. And when new hair grows in, it doesn't feel as strong or thick. And one really important detail is that the front hairline is usually preserved. So you're not seeing that dramatic recession in the front. It's more of a diffuse thinning across the top and the crown. Now, this is where a lot of people get confused because most women associate hair loss with shedding. They think, if I'm not seeing a lot of hair fall out, then I'm fine. But with hormonal hair loss, that's not always the case. The issue isn't just how much hair you're losing, it's the quality of what's growing back. Each cycle, the hair can come in thinner, weaker, more fragile. And that's why you will hear people say, my hair isn't falling out that much, but it feels like it's disappearing. And that's actually a very accurate way to describe it. To really understand hair loss, you have to understand how the hair cycle works, because your hair isn't just growing continuously, it is constantly cycling. And there are three main phases. The first one is the growth phase called anagen, and this can last anywhere from about 2 to even 10 years. Then there's a short transition phase, it's called catagen, and finally the resting phase, telogen, which is where the hair eventually sheds and a new cycle begins. Here's where this becomes really important. When your body goes through some kind of stress, whether that's physical or emotional, it can push more hairs out of the growth phase into the resting phase. But the shedding doesn't happen right away. There's a delay, usually around 3 to 4 months. So when someone says, I am stressed and my hair is falling out right now, that timing doesn't quite line up. What you're seeing today was actually triggered a few months earlier. And this is one of the reasons hair loss can feel so confusing, because the cause and the effect don't happen at the same time. This is probably one of the biggest point of confusion I see because not all hair loss is the same, and a lot of the time more than one thing is happening at once. One pattern is stress shedding, also known as telogen effluvium. This tends to feel more sudden. You will notice more hair coming out than usual in the shower or in your brush or in the pillow, just everywhere in the house. And it's usually triggered by something that could be physical or emotional stress, illness, rapid weight loss, starting or stopping birth control, or even postpartum changes. Then there is the hormonal thinning. This one is different. It's much more gradual. You may not see a lot of shedding, but over time, your hair starts to feel less dense. The strands become finer, weaker, and your overall volume decreases. And here's the key piece that brings this together. You can absolutely have both at the same time. So it's very common for someone to say, my hair is falling out and it's thinning. And that's not an exaggeration. That's actually what's happening biologically. To really understand this, you have to look at what's happening at the follicle level because that's where the real changes are happening. Hormonal hair loss is largely driven by androgens, especially a hormone called DHT. DHT interacts with receptors in the hair follicle, and in people who are sensitive to it, that interaction gradually causes the follicle to shrink. This process is called miniaturization. So over time, what you see is hair growing back thinner, the growth phase becoming shorter, and the follicle itself becoming weaker. Eventually, some follicles stop producing visible hair altogether, and this is probably the most important point in this entire conversation. It's not about how much hormone you have, it's about how sensitive your follicles are to it, which is why you can have completely normal lab results and still be experiencing hair loss. If you want to go deeper into that piece, I break it down in more detail in this video that just popped up here, especially which vitamins and minerals actually matter and which ones tend to be a waste of money. Hormonal changes, especially during perimenopause, add another layer to this. During this phase, estrogen doesn't just gradually decline, it fluctuates up one month, down the next, sometimes unpredictably, and that fluctuation alone acts as a form of physical stress on the body. So what a lot of women start noticing is more shedding than usual, changes in hair texture, maybe it feels drier, thinner, or harder to manage, and over time, a gradual decrease in density. At the same time, there's also a bigger shift happening because overall estrogen is trending low, and estrogen plays a supportive role in the hair growth cycle. So when those levels start to drop, you're not getting the same level of support for healthy, consistent growth. And this is where it becomes important to zoom out a bit because it's not just about hormones in isolation, it's how those hormones changes interact with everything else. Your stress levels, your nutrition, your inflammation levels, your overall internal environment. So what you're really seeing is a combination of hormonal fluctuation plus internal imbalances plus external stressors, all layering on top of each other. And that's why this phase can feel confusing because it's not one single cause you can point to, it's multiple factors happening at the same time. Something that I've seen more and more lately is hair loss connected to things that aren't always obvious at first. Take GLP-1 medications, for example. A lot of people assume that medication itself is causing the hair loss, but in most cases, that's not really what's happening. What I'm actually seeing in this is rapid weight loss, not eating enough, and especially not getting enough protein. Over time, that creates nutrient deficiencies, and when your body is low on nutrients, hair becomes a very low priority. Because here's the reality, hair is not essential for survival, so if your body has to decide between supporting your brain, your heart, your organs, or your hair, it's always going to choose your organs, which means your hair is one of the first things to suffer. And then there's the stress, not just occasional stress, chronic ongoing stress, because this is where it gets tricky. Stress can trigger shedding, but then you start noticing your hair falling out, which creates more stress, and that leads to even more shedding. So it becomes a cycle, and unless you understand that cycle, it can feel like your hair loss is getting worse for no reason. There are a few things I hear all the time that sound right, but aren't actually helping people get results. One of the biggest one is relying only on supplements, and supplements can absolutely support your hair, especially if you have a deficiency, but they don't address what's happening at the follicle level when hormones are involved. So if that's the main driver, supplements alone usually aren't enough. Biotin is another one. It's probably the most popular supplement for hair, but unless you're actually deficient, it's not going to fix hormonal hair loss. And true biotin deficiency is pretty rare. Shampoo is another area where there's a lot of confusion. It can help with scalp health, things like inflammation or buildup, but it does not reach deep enough to change what's happening inside the follicle. So it is supportive, not corrective. And one more that catches people off guard, not seeing a lot of shedding doesn't mean everything is fine. Hair can thin without dramatic shedding because the issue isn't always how much hair you're losing, it's the quality of what's growing back. When it comes to actually treating this type of hair loss, this is where strategy really matters because there isn't just one cause, which means there isn't just one solution. The most effective approach is always multi-targeted. One piece of that is stimulating hair growth. This is where something like topicals along with red light and PRP therapy come in. What these are doing is helping extend the growth phase and improving blood flow around the follicle. So you're essentially giving the follicle a better environment to produce stronger hair. Another layer is addressing the hormonal component because if your follicles are sensitive to androgens and that's not being managed in some way, you can stimulate growth, but you're still working against that underlying signal. So depending on the person, this can look different, but it's an important piece. Then there's a scalp health, which often gets overlooked. Inflammation, buildup, microbiome imbalances, all of that affects how well the follicle functions. So even though things like shampoos or topical treatments aren't fixing the root cause on their own, they do create a healthier environment for growth. And there's the internal side. This is where we look at things like iron levels, vitamin D, protein intake, stress levels. Because if your body doesn't have the resources it needs, it's not going to prioritize your hair. And this is really the key takeaway. If you only focus on one layer, you limit your results. You might see some improvement, but not to the level you could. When all of these pieces are working together, that's when you start to see more meaningful, consistent progress. This is the part I really want you to understand because this is where most people start to feel discouraged. Hair growth is slow, and I know that's not what you want to hear, but this is very important to set right expectations so you don't give up too early. In the first few months, usually around 3 to 4, what you might notice is less shedding, and that matters because that's your first sign that something is shifting in the right direction. Then around 4 to 6 months, you might start to see early regrowth. It might not be dramatic. It can be subtle, shorter hairs, finer hair, but it is progress. And when it comes to actual density, that takes longer, usually closer to 6 to 12 months to really see a visible difference. So this is not an overnight transformation, it's a process. But if you're consistent and you're addressing the right causes, your hair can improve. Hair loss is not random, it's your body giving you information. And I know it can feel frustrating, confusing, sometimes even overwhelming. But when you understand what's actually driving it, when you understand the biology behind it, you're no longer guessing. You're able to respond to it in a much more targeted, effective way. And that's where things start to shift. Because this isn't about trying everything and hoping something works. It's about understanding your specific pattern and addressing it with intention. And once you have that clarity, you're not just reacting to hair loss anymore. You're actually doing something about it. If you're dealing with hair thinning and you're not really sure what type it is, you're not alone. And this is where getting clarity makes a big difference. Leave a comment and tell me what you've been noticing, whether it is shedding, thinning, changes in texture, whatever it is. I go through the comments and I will help you guide you in the right direction based on what you're experiencing. Because once you understand your pattern, everything becomes a lot more targeted and a lot less overwhelming.